So who do immersion programs work for and why? This is an interesting question because we've all heard the adage, the only way to learn a language is to immerse yourself in it. And so the thought that immersion programs don't work for everyone seems to be counterintuitive. But in reality, it's not immersion as a concept that's problematic. It's that generic language learning advice often suffers from correlation versus causation issues, meaning that general advice like, if you want to be strong, go to the gym a lot. If you want to be smart, go to the library a lot. And if you want to be good at languages, just immerse yourself a lot. And this advice correlates with success such that the strongest people do go to the gym a lot, the smartest people do spend a lot of time at the library, and the best language learners do spend a lot of time immersing themselves. But in reverse, just going to the gym a lot, or to the library a lot, or immersing yourself a lot isn't necessarily going to result in high-level performance because the devil is in the details. Specifically, when it comes to immersion programs, they tend to work against one of the key principles of language learning. And having done an immersion program myself, I've experienced firsthand this critical flaw that is antithetical to most students' goals. So what is the principle of language learning that immersion programs work against? Well, something that I've said in the past is that language learning is essentially a memory game. If we ignore the skill of pronunciation for a moment, everything else comes down to whether we can learn, retain, and recall the words, phrases, and grammar rules that we need to have with us for the long term so we can use the language and use it well. And so when it comes to memory, there are two key principles you need to keep in mind: association and spaced repetition. Association is where you take something that you already have in your mind and then you link an idea to it. For example, the verb for to find in Spanish is challenging for most students I've worked with until I point out that the Spanish verb for to find, encontrar, is just like the English verb to encounter. And the moment a student makes that association, the word instantly becomes much easier to remember. Now, the other way to improve your memory is through spaced repetition, which simply means learning something, waiting a while until you've almost forgotten it, relearning it again, waiting a while, and then doing this again until you can retain that piece of information in your long-term memory. So if you want to improve your memory of anything, whether it's Spanish vocabulary or someone's name or a bunch of facts just to impress people at a party, you need to apply one of association or spaced repetition to help those ideas stick in your memory. Now, if you cast your mind back to high school for a moment, you may have heard another common adage from a teacher when discussing final exams, and that is that cramming doesn't work. We're all taught in school that if you want to do well in exams, you should study all semester and not leave things to the last minute. Yet this happens a lot anyway, and I'm as guilty as anyone. I remember dozens of cramming sessions before my final exams at high school and university. But here's the thing. Cramming does work for one very specific goal, and that's passing an exam. In a 2009 study, experimenters demonstrated the effect of cramming versus spaced repetition by giving college students 2 stacks of words they had to study over a 4-day period. One stack had 20 word pairs they got to study every day. This was the spaced repetition stack. The other stack also had 20 word pairs, but participants only got to see 5 new word pairs each day. Then on day 5, they measured the participants' recall for the paired words across the study, and this graph demonstrates the results, where we can see that the average recall of the spaced word pairings across the group was 54%, and the recall of the mass stack was averaged at 21%, showing that spaced repetition is twice as effective. Then we can also see that the recall of the day 4 words kicked up, which demonstrates the cramming effect of the words learned the day before the test. And so if you spend an entire day cramming as much knowledge as you can about a subject, and then going into exam the next day and then regurgitating as much as you can from the cramming session, this can often be enough to pass an exam. Well, at least I've heard that's what happens. But in all seriousness, in my cases of cramming, if you were to ask me anything about the exam a week later, it's completely forgotten. Either I've crammed another subject between now and then, or it's summer holidays and I'm thinking that chemistry and physics are a problem for next year. And so cramming can have a short-term positive effect, but it won't work for retaining knowledge over the long term because it completely ignores and goes against one of the main principles of memory in spaced repetition. So hopefully you can see where I'm going here. Most immersion programs are like cramming for an exam. The way they work is that you fly down to Mexico or Costa Rica for a week, then you cram Spanish for 6 to 8 hours a day for 5 days, and then you fly home. A week after getting home, you will have forgotten upwards of 80% of what you learned. Now, this is my experience with an immersion program, And it makes sense in the context of spaced repetition and what we know about the science of memory. And so if you want Spanish to be part of your life long term, if you want to learn the vocabulary and remember it for years, the most important step is to space your studies out over weeks, months, and years. This is why we set up the courses the way we do at Real Fast Spanish. Our classes are spread across 12 weeks with one session per week because we know that if we can get a student to space out their studies over a longer period, we're much more likely to get the student to retain that information long term. Now, I mentioned that there is one scenario where I would say that an immersion program is useful, and that would be when a student needs to pass an exam. Now, I've worked with a few students over the years where they needed to pass a test for a promotion at work or a proficiency exam in order to be considered for a job application. Now, in this scenario, like the situation with a high school student that just needs to pass the exam and is constrained with time, an immersion program can be a really good solution. Say you need to pass a Spanish proficiency exam on the 18th of October, for example. Then I would say that if you can rearrange your life such that you can spend the first 2 weeks of October in an immersion program, this could go a long way towards helping pass that exam. Now again, just like in high school, if you really want to get top marks on the exam, you should be studying all semester due to the principle of spaced repetition. 2 weeks is probably not enough for an outstanding result on the exam, but it could be enough to pass. And so I know that life isn't always smooth, and sometimes there may be situations where an opportunity comes up and that student just needs to learn enough Spanish in a short time frame to get through the test. In this case, an immersion program is probably the way to go. But for the majority of students that want to have Spanish as a skill that they can keep for the rest of their lives, they need to avoid the trap of the short-term outcome of an immersion program and instead harness the principle of spaced repetition through regular and consistent study strategically spread out over weeks, months, and years. So if you had a similar experience with an immersion program to like what I had, that the information just didn't stick with you due to the short-term exposure, if so, please share your experience in the comments. And if you enjoyed this lesson, please remember to like, subscribe if you're not already, and share the video with someone you know that is currently considering an immersion program that might get benefit from this video. Okay, until next time, habla mejor, entiende más.